Greetings from Paranormal M, where we explore the world beyond our understanding. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more intriguing stories. We hope you have a thrilling time. Weird thing that happened in 2015. I have this weird thing that happened in 2015. I still to this day can't fully figure it out. I was sleeping, and in my dream I was watching myself sleep clear as day. Not so odd, right? Like I've heard about that happening before. Now the next part of the story is what is truly odd. The next morning when I woke up, my mom had mentioned to me that she went to the bathroom, that she was watching TV. My bedroom door was open that night. She said that she'd seen a shadow standing over me, like it was watching me sleep. She thought it was odd, but went to the bathroom and back to watching TV. I then told her what I was dreaming about. She was shocked, and we both still can't fully figure it out. What do you all think? Was it me, as in my spirit, or could it have been something else like a ghost or some sort? We've had many run-ins with ghosts in this house. This house was built in the early 1800s. We've lived here for about 25 years now. Had many odd, weird run-ins with ghosts, and I've used a ghost box and some weird stuff and, well, direct answers to questions that 5 or 6 people all heard at the same time. My apartment is haunted. So I moved in here 2 years ago on Halloween. I know this sounds really fake right now, but I swear to you, this is all real. I honestly would love some opinions on what you think is here. I'm going to quickly go through the things that have happened. But please, if you want more details, ask me. I just need to go back to bed for work right now, and I don't have much time or energy. And please note, I live alone with my cat. There used to be a smallest shower curtain rod in my shower. It's a glass shower and doesn't really need one, but my land people put it in there. One of the first nights after I moved in, that rod had been pulled up and off the shower. Hard to explain without pictures, but you'd have needed to push up on the rod for it to have come off. My cat was shut in the closet overnight. Random things will be out of place or moved just slightly. This has only happened a handful of times. However, last night at around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to a loud noise in my room. I thought my shelf of nail polishes fell or something because it's happened and it's loud. I don't really think that's paranormal. However, when I turned on the light, I discovered a small square table I've pushed out from against the wall was literally always where I have it. My cat hates my office. Anytime I'm in there, he'll come in, no matter what he's doing, and just sit and stare at me. He'll stare and meow until I have to leave, and then go back to sleep somewhere. My upstairs neighbors used to live here. Said that their daughter, whose bedroom was where my office is now, always hated sleeping in a room. One time I swear I hadn't touched the stove. It was the first thing in the morning, and I have a smoothie for breakfast every day and don't usually use the stove until like dinner time. But I was sitting watching TV and started smelling gas. Went to the stove and one of the burners was turned just enough that the gas was leaking. So, let me also say I've actually never felt threatened by whoever or whatever's living here. And for free, like if you're gonna move my stuff around, at least pay rent, my dude. Except for the time with the stove. I was scared mostly because that happened when I wasn't home. My cat probably still wouldn't be here with me. However, I have noticed that the most activity happens when I'm going through something difficult emotionally. Wondering if this is actually technically poltergeist activity. The first few months I moved in and I had a bunch of experiences. I was really stressed just having to move and needing to find a job and new place, new city, new everything. The time with the stove, I was feeling very depressed, pretty suicidal. Last night with the table in my room being pushed right now, I'm dealing with childhood trauma stuff in therapy, and it is no fun. Honestly, never dealt with it until now, but generally there's a lot of negative emotions I'm working through. One of my many stories. My great-grandmother. A little background. Growing up in my parents' house, we had the largest cemetery in town directly behind our house. To give a picture, there was my house with a 6-foot wooden fence and then a big bunch of pine trees. That was cemetery land. The area that the cemetery vaults were retained, and then the cemetery itself. The man who originally built the house had put in a gate in the back of the fence because his business was abutted to the cemetery property. But when he and his wife divorced, he sold the house, but there were 2 paths that led from that gate. One to his business and one to the cemetery itself. In this cemetery, there's over 3,000 graves. Most of them the flat plaques, very uniform and neat, with few headstones. Couple mausoleums, and a few private burial sites that require a key. Also, several of my family members are buried there. My great-grandparents, great-uncles, aunts, uncles, and cousins. This is about my great-grandma, who died of a broken heart, 6 months after my great-grandfather died. She would be at her house all the time after he passed, her father and mother diligently taking care of her. She was in her 80s and didn't realize what a treasure she was at the time since I was in 5th grade. She would often take naps in my room, meaning that I'd have to give up my privacy and hang out with my family when my introverted self wanted to be alone. Then one day my mom was in the kitchen crying. It was because great-grandma had been in the hospital. I didn't really know it was serious. She had died of a heart attack, but really it was a broken heart. She'd never been that ill, but her health took a turn for the worse. That was when she lost her mate. The other thing about my great-grandmother was she was a stickler for cleaning up. She took pride in the house being clean. After she passed, I guess she decided that she liked her house the best. My mom always had a cup of tea in the morning and afternoon. She'd put the mug that she used in the morning near the stove so she could reuse it in the afternoon. We'd all of a sudden start finding it near the sink with water in it. Also, beds that were unmade would be made, especially mine. Since great-grandma would nap in my bed, I never heard the tap of the sink go off, but I did often hear the clink of the mug hitting the counter. There was only ever one mug broken, and this phenomenon was still going on. Not as much until my parents' house was decimated by a tornado. The house being rebuilt on the same property, though. We hope that great-grandmother's ghost hasn't been too disturbed. My brother and I were punished by duende. This is a story from when my brother and I were kids visiting the Philippines where our parents come from. We were in elementary school, and at the time, so was that memory. This area is very country with rice fields and such. There were rarely any buildings higher than 1 story. The street the family home was on was dirt and unnamed. Our older cousins made my brother and I made us both some slingshots. Loved that thing. It was made from the branches of some tree and elastic bands from a vulcanizing shop. After terrorizing the local animals, I got in trouble, so I found this big discarded metal vegetable oil can for target practice. I set up the oil can on top of a small table. I put it in front of this bamboo clump. It made a nice loud metallic clunk noise. So we had a blast until some older cousins come along. They said that we probably shouldn't be shooting there because of duende living in that bamboo clump. Being a little know-it-all city punk, I decided to ignore them. Besides, I was having fun. My little brother, of course, decided to follow my lead. Nothing happens until the following morning. My memory is also a little bit spotty, and you'll soon understand why. I wake up with a really bad fever. I remember profusely sweating and having a pounding headache. I felt so weak I had a hard time moving unassisted. Couldn't even sit up. I remember my shirt being changed frequently. I was sweating so bad. I remember old women crowding to the room and praying over me. I remember candles with the Virgin Mary being lit. I remember being hit with big leaves. It might be malunge, like moringa leaves. I remember being made to drink this dark reddish aromatic tea. I remember being carried to the bathroom to bathe in the same dark reddish aromatic tea. Then I remember one morning feeling absolutely fine. It was as if nothing happened. I don't know how long I was sick for. It may have been days, it may have just been 24 hours, one and done. I don't even remember. As for my brother, he didn't really get sick, but one of his eyes got severely swollen. It was like he was smuggling a cue ball behind that thing. He said it didn't hurt when I asked him. His vision wasn't impaired, but boy did that thing get huge. No one knew what to make of it, kind of freaking out until Grandpa came to the rescue. He came with a small vial of rose oil that he put on top of the swollen area. The following morning, it was completely gone. My grandpa said that he went to the bamboo clump with the rose oil and asked the duende for forgiveness for his dumbass grandsons. He prayed there for hours until he felt like something happened. And that's when he came back with the rose oil. At least that's what people said when I was asking when I got older, but they always said my brother's eye got swollen because he accidentally hit the duende in the eye while we were doing our target practice. Even though this happened decades ago and that bamboo clump no longer exists, I still treat that area with reverence and respect. I'll greet let's just say I do my farewells to the duende every time I pass through there. You never know. Strange experience about frozen time. It was the summer of 2021. I, a 22-year-old female at the time, was sleeping, but I felt the urge to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I remember checking the time on my phone, and it was 7:43 a.m. Went to the bathroom, which is next door to my bedroom. Asked my mom, who was in there doing the laundry, to exit the bathroom, doing my business, seeing a cockroach. I exited the bathroom, telling my mom about the cockroach, and then I went back to bed. I want to say I suffer from a lot of sleep problems. I usually feel very sleepy during the morning, but not that time. I was feeling restless and energetic, but I was forcing myself to calm down, fall back asleep. Obviously, I had trouble falling back asleep, but since I suffer from insomnia, I have some methods I can use. So when I noticed they weren't working, I checked the time again. Since I know that if I ever go over a 15-minute mark, I won't sleep for a while. And surprise, surprise, it was still 7:43 a.m., down to the dot. That freaked me out, but I tried to stay calm. I checked the time on Google to see if my phone was having a glitch or something. It gave me the same result. I think that at least 10 minutes passed between my waking up and my checking the time. After forcing myself to relax, I managed to fall back asleep. Later in the morning, I asked my mom if she felt anything out of the ordinary, but she said no. She also told me that all of our house's electronics were working just fine. I don't do drugs, and never once in my life, and, well, carbon monoxide poisoning isn't a possibility. Already checked. The unoccupied apartment room. Back in university days, I lived in a small 3-bedroom apartment with 2 other roommates. My roommate was on the topmost floor of the building, and also the last room on the floor, the corner room. It's numbered 707. Our only neighbor is 706. It's been vacant for a while, so our side of the building is very quiet and sparse of people in general. There are 3 bedrooms which are joined in an upside-down L shape. One room in the middle, one room on the left of it, and another room below it. For ease of storytelling, I'll call it the middle room, the bottom room, and the left room. My room is the bottom room. To be noted, these are Japanese rooms in a Japanese building. So wood flooring, sliding doors, sliding closet inside the room, thin wood panel wall between rooms. The left room and middle room both had heavy sliding doors. Between the middle room and my bottom room, there's a hollow space that's pretty large with a closet and a sliding door as well. It's the closet where you fold and store the futon and such. If you ever watch Doraemon, it's the same closet that he sleeps in. The story happened on a summer vacation. The owner of the middle room had been away for a few days and won't be back until the new semester started. So one night, I left the room. The owner was chilling in each of our rooms, and the left room owner, we'll call her Lefty, she was supposed to leave for summer vacation in a week and has been packing. Kept hearing loud thuds and the sounds of something hitting the floor and wall. But I ignored it because I assumed she was just packing. About 2300 at night, Lefty texted me, "Yumi, are you okay? You sick?" I was so confused. Lefty continued, "I kept hearing somebody sneezing and coughing. Isn't that you?" I said, "No, I've been quiet this entire time. Isn't it you who's been moving around and packing boxes?" Lefty said, "What? I haven't been packing anything at all today. I've been on my bed playing with my phone the entire time." Immediately I put down the headset and laptop and just sat straight on my bed looking at the text on my phone. I was feeling somewhat disturbed. About 5 minutes later, Lefty came into my room and we both sat together confirming with each other what we just heard, and she heard somebody sniffling and sneezing. I heard thuds and sounds of something on the floor, like the sound of boxes or something pushed against the floor. So we sat in silence in my room. The sound came again. Thud and knocks. Looking at each other, we figured it out. She thought the sound came from me, I thought it came from her. But in between our 2 rooms, the common space, the unoccupied middle room, there was knocking, thud, the sounds of boxes moving, and there was a sound of footsteps for sure. It sounded like a very active person inside the room the entire night. Neither of us wanted to go check, so we tried to ignore it and just slept through it. Fast forward to morning. Lefty is an early riser. I don't really wake up until 9 or 10. My bed's on the right side of the door, but I sleep facing the door. I just woke up and I heard loud footsteps from outside my room like somebody was running. I saw a short shadow passing through the cracks of my slightly open door. It took my sleepy brain for a while to process this. Like running footstep sounds is very common because my room's beside the front door. So every school day my roommates would make this commotion outside my door when they're going out of the house. However, the first thing I finally noticed, this is summer vacation who'd be running in a rush like this in the hallway. And the second thing, that shadow looked too short to be my roommate. It's the height of a child. And third, I can see the shadow through the cracks in my slightly open door. Who opened my door? I don't sleep with my door opened. Feeling scared, I immediately texted Lefty. I asked where she was. She said that she left the house at 7:30 a.m. because it's Sunday, church, and, well, she's about to go get lunch. She didn't open my door nor touch my room, and it was closed when she left. I immediately got up and ran out of the house to meet Lefty and told her about this morning. We decided to drag another friend and asked him to help us check our apartment and see if there's anyone or something. The 3 of us walked into the apartment and toward the middle room. We noticed something weird. The door was slightly opened. It was a sliding door and quite heavy. There's no way it can open by itself. And we confirmed that neither me nor Lefty had touched that door since the owner left last week. It was always closed. Our friend opened the room and we just immediately felt chills. He asked where we heard the sound coming from and said that my room had sounded like it came from very close, like right on the wall connecting between my bottom room and this middle room. That's when we realized the wall connected between my room and this middle room, where we heard all the activities. It was inside the closet. think I crossed paths with a skinwalker. I live in Puyallup tribal land. I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I was on my way home in an area where sometimes the unhoused hang out. So when I saw this thing crossing the road, my brain tried to rationalize it as an unhoused person behaving and looking really weirdly. I'm just gonna change unhoused to homeless, because that's frustrating to me. A few seconds later, my eyes caught up to my brain, and I knew it wasn't just a homeless person. The details of what it looked like are too strange. It jumped down the road ahead, probably 10 yards or so in front of me, began running from my left to my right. It was running from the sidewalk of a parking lot to the front of a local DSHS building. That's where, had it been a person, and at the speed I was going, I would have been able to see them on my right. It was hunched about the size of an Irish wolfhound or slightly bigger. It looked to be running either on all four limbs or so hunched that its long arms almost touched the road. It wore a cape, or at least a long coat which covered its body except for the hands, which were long and spindly. This cape thing was light brown, almost looked like it was made out of fur. The worst part was the head. I saw that super clearly. It was a big head with a long snout, kind of like the aforementioned wolfhound, with shaggy brown hair dangling down one side. I could clearly see a long mouth, like long, slightly open. I could see teeth. I saw its eye. It was shiny, almost reflective and orangish. Ran fast, dangled its arms, and as I drove by, I slowed down to look. But nothing was there. I have a dash cam, so I thought for sure I could check it. The quality's crap because my glass is dirty, but you can see me slow down. I tried to crop those 2 minutes to get a clear view. This is a very bright car light coming towards me on the opposite side of the road that would have for sure been blocked by a person or the animal running across it. So I'm over here trying to email it to myself and it won't send. Trying to save it and it won't save. I get home and I'm telling my husband, who's never seen one or a rendition of one, so I Google it. The first image I see is the one I've attached to this post. I was flabbergasted. It's literally what I saw, minus the jewelry, spear, and feathers. Plus the arms were long and the hands were creepy as fuck. What the hell did happen 4 years ago? I've never told about this to anybody. That's because I don't believe in the paranormal. I always thought this was bullshit, and honestly, I still don't believe. But since this event, I still don't really understand if it was real or my mind projected something weird for a few minutes. This situation happened 4 years ago. It was January. I was alone in my apartment in the summer, but my parents would come for a visit in a few hours. It was too hot, and almost every night I had a great idea of taking a cold shower. Since there was nobody, I didn't close the door of the bathroom, but the shower glass door was closed all the time. While I was taking a shower, I saw something walk in front of me outside the bathroom. This thing went to the left and to the right 4 times. First time I thought this could be my imagination, but the second time the figure passed through the bathroom. Turned off the shower and yelled, "Anybody here?" I thought it was my parents, but nobody answered. Figure made the same trajectory, right, left, right, left. The 4th figure stopped outside the bathroom and it was looking at me for 10 or 15 seconds. Then the figure went to the left and opened the door. I yelled again, but nobody answered. Got out of the bathroom and walked to each part of the apartment. No one was at the home, only me. Sometimes the situation gives me the shivers. Three messengers from God. About 2 years ago, I fled a house I was assaulted in. I took my savings and drove up and down the majority of the East Coast. I went south to Florida. As I started working my way back up, I started wondering if I should head west. I've always wanted to go west. In Washington, D.C., I was outside the Walmart. A woman passed me and several minutes came back to ask me if I believed in Jesus. She said the Spirit had told me to come back to talk to me, to tell me that I needed to turn around. I thanked her for her message later that night, and I was heading north again. Laurel, Maryland, a man approached me, told me that I was going the wrong way, that I needed to turn around. He said very little else. Waterville, Maine, a man approached me to ask for a lighter. We smoked in silence side by side a few moments before he spoke. He said, "I'm God's third messenger. God says you're going the wrong way. If you don't turn around, you will die." I didn't continue further north or head west. I went back to a town I knew I had plenty of resources, got a job, and saved just enough money to repair a series of car issues as they happened. It's been some time since these three strangers all approached me with similar messages, but the last one sends tingles down my spine still. I feel kind of like a crazy person for asking this, but it doesn't feel like these things are a coincidence. What exactly did I experience? The Faceless Man. Think about this a couple of times a year. I've looked it up but never found anything similar. This happened a few years ago. One night my now wife and I were driving back from Sonic. We lived in a very, very small town in West Texas. It's raining, but not heavily. Puddles on the ground, wet enough that it would be weird for somebody to be walking around. And on top of that, there's lots of roads with little or no lighting, so lots of the roads are mostly dark at night. We were driving down one such road when this happened. As my wife and I were driving, I looked to my right and I saw what I can only describe to be a faceless man. Not deformed, but faceless. His face was white, or really all of them looked white. He looked almost like a blur. His arms seemed impossibly long, almost down to the ground, or moving in just unnatural ways. The arms are swinging back and forth aimlessly, but also very fast. Best I can describe this man's movements is that he looked like he was glitching. We weren't moving fast, probably 25 miles an hour, but we were in a residential area and I looked at him as long enough as I could, and I had time to wonder what I was looking at before he went out of my view. For a second, I even wondered if something was using a weed whacker doing yard work, but it was 9 o'clock and raining. I said nothing to my wife, assuming my eyes had just played tricks on me, and it was dark, and maybe the rain blurred the window. I don't know. A couple of hours later, my wife asked me if I noticed the man on the side of the road that had no face. Still the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Anybody know what this might be called, or anybody who's experienced a similar experience? Saved by my mother? Or was it all just a coincidence and self-inflicted scratches in my sleep? It's 4 a.m. and I can't sleep. It's because this is clogging up my mind and my boyfriend isn't home to talk about it and he's at work. I'd recently made this account to lurk on these kinds of channels out of the interest of, But I am a skeptic. I don't believe in God, or the afterlife, or ghosts, or anything else paranormal. But a couple of months ago I had an experience that's rattled my usual mantra of, there's always a logical explanation, and it's had me questioning my lifelong perception. I had gone on a camping trip with my partner. We were sleeping in a tent close to a riverbank following a day of fishing. There was a little rain about, but nothing to worry us. There was no reception there to check weather, but that's kind of what we'd gone to this particular area for. Just us getting away for a week alone. I was dreaming and my mother, who's passed away, appeared out of nowhere and grabbed me in quite a panic. "Wake up and go home now!" She screamed at me and shook me quite violently. I could even feel her fingernails scratching my chest in my dream where she grabbed me in the collared shirt I was wearing. The shrill sound of her voice and the look in her eyes caused me to jolt awake in a huff. I woke my partner up in my panic and sudden movement. It was about 1 a.m. My partner asked me if it was okay because I was actually quite upset and rattled. I could feel a slight stinging pain on my chest and thinking I'd just been bitten by an ant or a spider while I was sleeping. Grabbed the lantern that we had in the tent and turned it on to see 6 fresh identical scratch marks. There was 3 on either side of my chest on my skin where I dreamt that my mother had scratched me when she grabbed me in the dream. "Where'd you get those?" my boyfriend asked me. I was more than a little bit freaked out. The scratches hadn't drawn blood, but they were quite red and quite noticeable. I had a nightmare that my mom grabbed me and screamed at me to wake up and go home. I dreamt that she scratched me there. I replied, still very confused and looking for another explanation for the scratches amongst her blankets. I don't really believe in this stuff, but my boyfriend does, and he jumped up, dragged me out of the tent, and threw our belongings in the tent back of the car as quick as he could in a jumbled mess. We drove the 3.5 hours home mid-holiday, all while I tried to convince him that it was just a bad dream and that we should go back and live out the rest of our holiday. The next afternoon, my partner practically dragged me into his office to show me his computer that the area where he'd been sleeping in our tent had been hit by a sudden rise in floodwaters. The riverbank that had been camping on for at least 3 meters underwater explained to me that the waters had apparently risen within an hour of us leaving. I've refused to talk to him about it, or admit to him that it's got me rattled and lost for explanation. But he recently talked me into visiting my mother's grave to thank her for saving our lives. We mowed the lawn and left fresh flowers. I'm hoping that sharing this experience with somebody that isn't hell-bent on getting me to admit that stuff exists will allow me to focus. Maybe even get some sleep at last. Strange occurrence in the mountains. This all happened back in 1985 and 1986, but these are things that my friend and I will never forget. I was working the summers at an old retreat in North Carolina mountains. Had about 50 other young adults. It was great fun. While the place had lots of modern buildings, it was ruled over by a hulking white building built in 1912. I think it's important to note that most of the building is just an extension of the mountain itself. It was built using the trees from right where it stands, as well as the rocks and boulders used for the foundation. It's 3 stories, but really 5, counting the basement and the attic full of bats. It was great watching them pour out of there every night. The front of the building is an enormous portico with white columns stretching up 3 stories. That porch is full of rocking chairs from which you can see a majestic view of the Smoky Mountains. But the back of that building, that's where we worked. The back of the building was hugged by 2 large wings, forming a U-shape back there. We entered our housekeeping facilities via a fire escape that stretched straight up to the 2nd floor entrance. A single green metal door. That door was one I knew well. Housekeeping was my department for 3 summers. And even though this was now just the end of my first summer, I was well acquainted with it. It was big, green, metallic, and heavy as shit, with a pull on the outside and a bar to push it on the inside to open it. It did not stay open. In fact, fire regulations required it stay closed at all times. It was engineered to shut automatically. So of course, during the summer, with no air conditioning in the building, we kept it propped open with a full bucket of water during the day. Regulations be damned. Sorry this is long, but I feel like all this information is important. A few nights before we all left, we were cleaning out our dorms, trying to turn it into a party. That was when we all ran and put our cleaning supplies. So around 9 o'clock at night, my best friend and I drive our lazy asses down to the back of the building. It was only a short distance, but there was a very steep incline that we didn't want to walk. Parked my car right in front of the stairs and we get out. At this point, we both just began to feel odd. The air was still and stuffy and I felt positively enveloped by this building. standing in the middle with those massive wings rising around us. The building was completely dark, and since we'd been shutting it down for the winter, it was already locked up tight. My friend had been with me earlier in the day when I locked that door, the one to the top of the stairs. As we climbed the stairs, I felt positively oppressed, and I had to stop. My friend did too. Told him I was scared, and he admitted the same. He'd never felt scared of this building before. I'd spent plenty of time in it alone, exploring the basement and the attic. We pressed slowly forward again, and a few steps up I literally felt an icy chill going down my spine. I know it's a stupid cliche, but I've never felt anything like it before or since, like someone pressing an icicle down the length of my spine. Finally, we reached the top of the stairs, and the instant I put my foot on the top landing, that freaking door swung open wide and stood open for us. It was revealing the short entranceway bathed in red light of the exit sign. It wanted us in there, and we both felt it, but it didn't feel welcoming at all. In fact, I've never been more scared of anything in my life. I get freaked out about it now, like 37 years later. We both just stood there, completely stunned for what felt like minutes before I completely freaked out and started screaming incoherently. I scrambled down the steps, jumping way too many times on the way down, and we both ran up the steep incline, yelling and screaming. Everybody came down and searched the building with us. It was empty, of course, and the door was shut fast and locked when we got back. No one could have pushed that door open and run away without us hearing them. The floors squeaked when he walked on them, and somebody running would have been very loud. We've looked at this from every angle. I just have no explanation for what happened. I worked there for 3 summers in that building. I have more stories if interested. My friend stayed to work throughout the winter one year and saw the Hat Man in the same building. There's something wrong in my house. Falling toys. The earliest thing I can remember that really freaked me out about my house was the recurring experience of soft toys that I had put away on top of my wardrobe. They would suddenly fall to the floor. I would notice that a toy had definitely been on top of my wardrobe before I went to bed. It would be on the floor when I woke up the next morning. Being a very young kid, it did freak me out, but I didn't really understand ghosts or anything, so I just kind of laughed it off. I was thinking it was the wind or poor placement of the toys. But as this became more common, I became more unsettled. I remember once I heard a soft thud, turned to see a toy hedgehog now on the floor. I was fed up at this point. And, well, I picked up the toy and I said to the empty air, "If that was you, do it again." Nothing happened, so I brushed it off and tried to go on. Told my younger sister about what had happened, and we both laughed about it. I asked if she had any similar experiences. She said no. The last time I can remember a toy falling from my wardrobe was the worst of all. My sister had a friend over for a sleepover. She told her friend about the weird experiences. The friend asked to see it, so they came to my room. All 3 of us stood near the doorway, and I noticed the hedgehog on the floor again. Called out once again to the empty air, "If there's somebody here, knock a toy off the wardrobe." We all waited in silence until suddenly there was a soft thud and a toy had fallen. I don't remember much of what I was thinking. Well, all I remember was hearing somebody scream and running out of my room. A toy hasn't fallen off of the wardrobe since. Sounds in the night. The next thing I remember happening in my house is a collection of small, unsettling things that happened in the middle of the night. I've always had trouble sleeping, so it wasn't uncommon for me to be awake long into the night when everybody else was asleep. It was during these unsettled nights that I would hear and experience a lot of things I couldn't explain. The most common thing I remember happening was various creaks and sounds of people moving around. It wasn't unusual for my floorboards to creak, but they'd only creak when people were walking around. But every time I would check to see if anybody was up and moving, they'd all still be fast asleep. My sister's door would still be closed. There were also many occurrences of hearing sounds of scratching at my door if it was closed. This wasn't something that worried me, as we had always owned cats, so I would just go and open the door and let them in. However, on multiple occasions I opened the door to an empty corridor with no cats even upstairs. That never sat right with me. The most disturbing and unexplainable thing that happened in the night was something I'll never forget. It had been a completely normal night. I had fallen asleep moderately easily. But a few hours later I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep. I was frustrated, but I was so young that I didn't have a phone to keep me entertained. So I was sat doing nothing till I could fall back asleep. However, before I could even get tired, a loud crash sounded through my room. I looked up frantically to see a small yellow ball bouncing on my floor like it had just been thrown into my room. I was terrified. Picked up the ball and ran into the corridor expecting to see maybe my sister or my mom, but the house was silent. My parents were fast asleep. My sister's door was closed. And for context, my sister always closes her door at night and always knows when her door opens. That's because her door has always been unbearably loud when opening. It creaks and floods the entire house with noise. So I immediately knew that something had left her room that night, or rather had not. Moving doors. Another common occurrence in my house that still happens to this day is doors opening and closing without any wind or human influence. The most notable instance of this was one day when I was washing my hands. Suddenly the bathroom door swung closed. I looked up in a panic and watched as the door began to swing open and closed. I shouted out to see if anyone was on the landing, but my family were all downstairs. I cautiously turned around and called out for whatever was there to prove itself by closing the door. After a few seconds, pause. Door slammed shut and I screamed. Quickly opened the door and ran out of the bathroom. Once I'd calmed down, I went back to the bathroom thinking it might have been the wind, but to my horror, the window was closed tight. The Ouija board sessions. For Christmas one year I asked for a Ouija board. I was a weird kid. I used the board a few times with family in locations other than my own house. I'd never been confident enough to use it in my home. Knowing that already concerning experience I had over the years, I was too scared to risk communicating with whatever may be living in the house. But one night I decided that I felt brave enough to use the board in my house. It was around 2 a.m. Got the board out, ready, and opened it. Using the safest methods I knew, I sat with my fingers resting on the planchette for a few minutes. I was too scared to ask anything. Felt like all of the courage from moments ago had vanished into thin air. I sat in tense silence for a few minutes before finally asking a question. "Is anybody there who would like to communicate?" I asked quietly, not wanting to wake others in my house, and almost instantaneously, the planchette slid across the board. Felt a shiver run down my spine, and I hadn't expected a response, especially not one this quickly. I tried to quell my building panic as the planchette flew across the board and sat firmly on yes. I sucked in a sharp breath and tried to think of what to ask next. "What's your name?" I asked, and more cautiously, no response. How old are you?" Still nothing. Asked a few more questions, still to no avail. I had got one explicit response and then nothing more. Not even a shift, and the planchette sat completely motionless on yes. Feeling defeated, I shut down the board. However, I couldn't leave it just like that. I had an uneasy feeling brewing in my stomach. I sat and contemplated what to do for a while before, deciding to reopen the board and try again. I repeated the opening process and got ready to ask the question again, this time with more determination. "Is anybody there who would like to communicate?" I asked once again. The planchette flew to yes, and this time with more force. I had to swallow back a yelp at the action. I repeated the same questions of the previous session, and still I received no response apart from the first response. My blood just ran cold. I felt as if there was a looming presence in the room watching my every move, but I couldn't see anyone. I closed the board frantically and hid behind my bed. The feeling of pure terror didn't leave. I didn't fall asleep that night. Never used that board in my room since. sometimes when I see it in the corner of my eye, I can still feel that terrifying presence looming over my shoulder. I don't know what's happening. So since I was little, I've been very curious about the paranormal, and also obsessed with the story my mother told me about one of her experiences at her old job. Till 2 years ago, I never had any experiences, but the activities increased. My first ever experience was in the middle of a class where I felt someone touch me in the back several times. Couldn't be any of my classmates because I was in the back. And from that day on, I've had several things happen to me in my house. I've heard very uncommon names in the country where I'm from. I've had objects thrown, like, feels like I'm being watched and stuff like that. But there are 4 occasions that I can't forget. 1. I've seen an old lady going from my bathroom to my parents' room, and I've actually talked with my parents and aunt and uncle about this. My aunt told me that fit the description of my great-grandmother. 2. Heard a male screaming, "Get out," when I was going to go back to sleep. 3. So everybody knows the Shadow Man and stuff. I saw a tall, skinny man completely white, almost like he was made of light, just standing on my doorway looking at me. I didn't feel safe at all. 4. This one happened pretty recently. So I think about 5 days ago I asked my mom about the place in which she had the experience I talked about in the start. That's because I always had an image come into my mind when I thought about it. I was basically asking her, "Oh, is there a large dark table made of wood?" She kinda looked surprised and just confirmed everything I asked. I never saw a photo of the place, so I was just kind of in shock. Something that happened last night. No idea what it could be. Little bit of backstory. I've been able to see things for a certain degree since I was young. Witchcraft runs in my family. I've played a Ouija board before when I was 14, now 18. There's a shadow man and a female spirit in my bedroom. These spirits like to turn on my fan. The fan has a button that turns it on, and nothing else can turn it on. This happened last night at around 2:30 or 2:44 a.m. last night. I had come back from the hospital at around 1:30, fell asleep next to my partner. I woke up and there was a face about 4-6 inches away from mine. I could fully see in my dark bedroom and it looked Caucasian, blue eyes, bald, no eyebrows or facial hair. I could also feel the bed sink down as if somebody was over top of me holding themselves up. I spoke calmly. "You need to get up." I got off and stood by my laundry basket about 3 feet away from the foot of my bed. I felt it get off the bed as my bed rose and moved. My partner was still sound asleep. As it stood by my basket, he said it again. "You need to get up." I could only see its face as the rest of him was completely black and no physical features could be made out. I asked, "What?" But it didn't say anything back. It sat up and a few seconds after that it was just gone. I went back to sleep after a few minutes and nothing else happened for the rest of the night. I started hearing footsteps when we first moved in. For some context to us moving, me and my family were moving between states with our 2 dogs. We stopped in Tombstone, Arizona. We were staying there for the night. At some point in the day, a man sitting on a bench across the street from a store stops us. He says to look up to the window because we could see a silhouette of a ghost. I was the only one who didn't see it. And later on, we go to our hotel, and the next morning, my brother and my mom both said that they woke up in the middle of the night in sleep paralysis. They both said they saw a figure in our room. Fast forward some, we get our new house for a few years. Eventually, we get a 3rd dog. While living here, the others claim they saw some paranormal events. Some at home, some out around town, and off some side roads. Again, I never saw or felt the presence of anything. So finally, we're moving into our current residence. And this is when I absolutely experienced something paranormal. And before I say what I felt, I'll talk about what I didn't have. There were 3 dogs who weren't with us at the time, and they were either at a pet hotel or an apartment one of our parents was at due to work, and they moved here before the rest of us. I cannot recall whether we had slept in our current house at this point, and I know for certain that we had just begun unpacking. I only had my bed unpacked, and we didn't have Wi-Fi. There's nothing for me to do at home, and even though I was a sophomore in high school and didn't have my own cell phone, I hadn't even started attending my own school yet. So my parents and brother decided they wanted to go to jiu-jitsu class. They already knew I didn't care to go, but they asked me one more time if I'd like to just watch. I once again declined. If I had the foresight to realize we didn't have Wi-Fi, I probably would have gone with them. Not too sure why my mother didn't leave the phone for me, because in my older houses this was something that happened a few times. It was already pretty late in the day. Alright, to the story. I'm now home alone, no dogs, no entertainment, no Wi-Fi, no phone. Well, I had a 3DS, but not my charger. Playing games for a bit when I noticed it was about to die. Realize I left my charger in the car. My fun is now over. Can't recall what I'm doing, but for about 10 minutes I'm slowly getting bored. Something starts to feel off, but I brushed off as being a new house and being all alone. It was a very quiet night. Sitting on my bed listening to the echo of the highway a few miles out. Normally I can't hear it when the AC is turned on, but when it's turned off and dead quiet in my house, I can hear it. So the only things I can hear is the echo of a distant highway and the gentle ringing of oncoming tinnitus. You and me both. Then I hear a footstep. Sounds like someone was walking on the carpet. There's just this distinct noise to it. The door to my room was wide open, but even if the door was closed, I would have heard a footstep. Even if I did close it, I couldn't lock it. Every doorway in the hall was open right now. Sitting there frozen in place, and what felt like a minute go by, and I heard another footstep. It's undeniable that I'm hearing a footstep. Slowly start to stand up and very cautiously make my way to the bathroom. When I walk out into my door frame, the feeling that something's wrong starts to flood into me. I don't move at all, I'm just standing there waiting. That's when I heard a 3rd footstep. Quickly dart for the bathroom across the hall and close the door, locking it. For a few minutes I don't hear anything. Then I hear another footstep. This time it immediately gets followed up by another one, then another. I can roughly tell where it is, and I hear it walk up to the bathroom door. At this moment I was convinced that there was somebody in the house, and well, the next few minutes, there'd be quick bursts of footsteps, as if somebody was speed walking between rooms, like stopping for a minute and then moving to the next room. Sometimes it stopped in front of the bathroom door, and it was like a louder, constant movement. This went on for a few minutes. I knew that if there was a person in my house, I probably couldn't fight them off. For some reason I decided to say, "Go away," the next time the footstep came to the door. At this point, I was getting annoyed and still very scared. There's a prolonged period of silence before it moved to another room. It comes back and I go, "You better leave right now." Silence. It moves to another room. The final time I say something, I say, "Leave me alone." And it goes away. I still hear it moving around the hall and going to different bedrooms, but it seemed to have stopped waiting at the bathroom door. But also it was back to slower footsteps, as if somebody was trying to be quiet. Eventually the footsteps walked away and sounded like they went somewhere else in the house. I quit hearing them for the remainder of the night. I was too scared of what happened and stayed in my bathroom. Overall, I heard something walk for about 45-ish minutes. My parents came home, they were gone for about 2.5 hours. Explained what happened, and we checked the entire house, after which everybody claimed it must have been a ghost. They were all surprised at how shaky I was, and that I looked pale. To this day, I'm still skeptical on what really happened. Never witnessed or heard anything paranormal like this by myself prior. For the past few years living here, others in my family have experiences, and they've seen things, even footsteps. I haven't had any more encounters, at least. bang so loud in the attic that it shook my house. My wife and I bought a house in the country next to a Civil War battlefield in Northern Virginia. The original property was a 4,000-acre plantation that was subdivided into multiple smaller farms. The original plantation house of the 4,000-acre property was situated on our lot about 15 yards behind the house. It had all of its stone foundation, chimney, and well. Our house was built in the mid-'80s by hand, but the previous owner, who worked for NASA and IBM, passed away after a battle with cancer. We fell in love with the house and the property. You could tell this house was the man's life work. After purchasing the house for a great price, we walked the property with his widow and oldest adult son. Well, they walked the entire property and the house with us. But what I found odd is that both the widow and the son refused to enter the half-unfinished downstairs basement adamantly. Long story with too many experiences to list. My wife and I, over the course of 5 years, friends, family that stayed the night, all experienced poltergeist phenomena. From the TV changing itself to the NASA space station channel regularly, the cabinets slamming, footsteps heard throughout the house, an out-of-body sound of somebody clear as day whistling for a dog. It was all heard by everybody regularly. Sometimes the whistling would be right over our shoulder in our ear like it was messing with us. Sometimes while you were in the shower. And one time in the basement alone, I was painting the ceiling on a ladder. I heard the double whistle right in my ear over my shoulder so loud and clear I jumped off the ladder, backed myself up against the wall to see what was coming. So freaked out I actually ran out of the back door to the backyard, just went around the house back upstairs instead of running through the basement to get to the stairs. I'm not an easily person to shake, but that was just too much. My dog would always stare and bark at the corner of the family room. He refused to go downstairs. I would pick him up and physically carry him downstairs to only have him spring right back up and bark at us from the top of the stairs till we came back up. My wife has had a hand brush across the back of her neck multiple times. Sinks, lights turning on by themselves right in front of us. Keys and other important small things go missing. They would never be found again, no matter how hard we searched every inch of the house. I would wake up around 4:30 a.m. to go to work and regularly find the same 2 doors leading out back towards the old plantation house wide open with bugs and mosquitoes flying in for God knows how long. Maybe all night after we made sure to lock them every night, my mother-in-law was awoken one night by a man's voice asking her, "Who are you?" While living in a haunted house, you have no choice but to ignore the activity. I got used to it. It would come and go in cycles. Never felt like a bad presence or saw any apparitions. Always figured it was the old owner and always joked to each other that there goes Mr. Copper. But one day I was home alone lying on the couch broad daylight after a day of work. We heard a bang so loud it actually shook the entire 3,000 square foot house. It sounded like it came from our attic. I immediately jumped up and thought one of the large oak trees around the house crashed through the roof. Sprinted outside to assess the damage, but the roof was completely fine. No downed trees. My second thought was our AC unit in the attic just replaced fell out on the pedestals and crashed through the ceiling. Grabbed a flashlight and scoured the entire attic to find nothing wrong. I discovered no earthquake in the area and no other neighbors felt anything. Seems like the activity in the house pinned times toward the last month while we were there getting the house ready to sell. It's been 2 years since we moved and have no activity since, but not a day goes by where I don't think about the strange activity in the house. I was just curious if anybody else had any similar experiences, especially with unexplained house shaking and bangs. Serious. Do you have any paranormal or fairy or demon or alien encounter real story that you want to add? About 7 years ago, in my house, I began to have weird experiences that we would call duende, which is similar to a dwarf or a goblin or a gnome. It first began as somebody knocking the window of my parents' bathroom. They occurred at daytime. First, I thought it was the wind when it hits the window, but I tried an experiment recreating the sound, and it wasn't the same as the wind hitting the window. Some days later, I was walking outside of my yard, saw the line of flower pots that we had, and I began to see something rustling and running toward me in the pots. Ran inside my house and had my door slightly open from the dining room. I was looking at the door, and that's when I saw a small shadow figure with a point on its head. It was walking creepily until it hid behind the cabinet there. I was mesmerized, so I decided to tell my brother about my events. He told me I was being dumb and I was being crazy, even though he had heard the knockings in the window before. So one day when the lights went out at night, he was using his cell phone's flashlight, and that's when a shadow figure began running between his legs, and he screamed about it. Even sometimes he was outside and could see my dog crouch and growl at something. Sometimes there was nothing even there. Even once he was in the bathroom, he heard knocking, and how like if something dropped off and stepped on the tank in the ground in front of the window, like if it was escaping from their mischief. And another day I was just waking up in the morning, heard some whistling, like calling for attention. It was weird because it was like if it came from outside, but you could hear it close if it came from the ambience. The major thing that happened is that one day the house keys got lost. So my mom was angry and made us look for them. We looked for them all day and night, eventually let it go. The next day I went to college and received a call from my mom telling me she found the keys, and asked her, where were they? She told me. They were in the window outside of my bathroom. Did you put them there? I was shocked because neither my brother or I took the keys. My mom was angry enough, so we also discarded the fact that she did it to prank us. And I'm not ending this to prank you. But nonetheless, see ya.